Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. From the nation's capital, I'm Kelly Wright, and I greet each and every one of you as we spend this next hour together. And as always, as I've stated every show, I sincerely hope that wherever you are, that you're safe and well, taking care of yourself and your family, in particular as we deal with this COVID-19 pandemic. Let me get to my opening observations briefly, stating this, that we are engaged in a struggle. And it was the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass who bought and fought his way to freedom from slavery, went on to say that without struggle, there can be no progress. And certainly we find ourselves engaged in a Herculean struggle against this coronavirus. 50,000 cases of coronavirus in one single day. Now, the silver lining in all of that is that the number of deaths from coronavirus have gone downward while the cases are still rising upward. But it still suggests, and it still states to us directly, that we do indeed have a struggle. And we do indeed need to fight together to win this together in order to have progress. Having stated that, here on the National Mall, the President of the United States will have a 4th of July celebration with fireworks, and is inviting thousands of people to come here. In fact, 300,000 masks will be provided to people who come here. The mayor of this great city, Washington, D.C., has advised people not to gather on this mall on July 4th for the fireworks because it is dangerous. It can expose them to the spread of the coronavirus. And so the dichotomy continues in leadership. The mixed messaging continues in leadership. But remember, as Frederick Douglass stated, we must struggle in order to gain progress, including at times struggling with our own better angels and our leaders, trying to decipher what is the best way to move forward in safeguarding our people and this nation. And those are my opening observations. Health officials, including Dr. Anthony Fauci of the President's Coronavirus Task Force, are joining in the sentiment of D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser in urging people to stay home over the July 4th holiday. Some states have followed the public health facts and are now closing their bars, beaches, and canceling fireworks shows. But the president will continue with celebrations at Mount Rushmore tomorrow and then in D.C. on Saturday. The coronavirus is hitting Arizona, Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, particularly hard right now. In Florida alone, the Sunshine State experienced 10,000 cases in a single day. On Wednesday, I talked with DeKalb County Commissioner Lorraine Cochran Johnson in the Atlanta, Georgia area about the spread of the coronavirus. I wanted to ask you about the coronavirus spread, the fact that we're seeing it surge. And you were very adamant before Georgia reopened about the consequences of reopening too soon. In Georgia and Texas and Florida and Arizona in particular have seen a surge in cases. And this is something you had warned the governor about. Where do you stand on this now? I know you were dissatisfied with the actions then. Where do you stand now, knowing that if we don't do something about these reopenings, we may see an increase, a steady climb in coronavirus cases?
Well, here in DeKalb, we're seeing it. I was dissatisfied then, Kelly, and I'm still dissatisfied now with the governor's decision, but I'm also dissatisfied with those of us who fail to understand the severity of what it is we are dealing with. Just because a person opens the floodgates and say, hey, come on in, may not be the best place for you to go. As it relates to, we had the conversation concerning, of course, as a municipality here in DeKalb, we cannot create or hold an individual to a higher standard than has been established by the governor. So because there is no requirement for mandatory masks in public spaces, DeKalb County can make the request, but we cannot hold individuals to that particular degree. We are seeing a spike. But one of the things that's interesting, because during our last conversation, what the data had shown was that the bulk of the presence of known COVID-19 cases were in our Black and Brown communities, with the highest concentrations of African Americans on the Eastern and the South unincorporated side. But now we're seeing a shift. We have had extreme, now the 30038 in which I live is not in the top five. Seeing the northern part of DeKalb, which has the highest concentration of Caucasian residents, with the highest cases, as well as Tucker and Doraville. So I don't know where the disconnect comes as it relates to the severity. Just yesterday at New Birth Church, and I'd like to give Pastor Jamal Bryant, Elder Stokes, and that entire church family my warmest sentiments. Over 1,800 free tests were conducted. As we continue testing, we're going to continue to see a sharp rise, because many of us have just honestly failed to shelter in place, protect ourselves and those around us. So there's critical concerns there, and I urge everyone that may be a part of this conversation to understand the severity of what we're dealing with. Just because it's now sunny outside, we cannot go back to business as usual and conduct ourselves as we once have. Our lives are forever changed, Kelly.
Yeah, it seems the sooner we awaken to that fact, the more lives we can save and mitigate the spread of this virus. And like Dr. Anthony Fauci and you have attested to before, wear a mask.
Wear a mask.
We'll be back with more of the program after the break. Welcome back. So again, I'm continuing to have a conversation. Conversations are so important. The dialogue that we exchange with each other is critical to where we find our healing and our thought process to achieve that healing. So joining me now is someone that many of you are familiar with. She's on my program quite often, Nikessa Craig. She's a licensed clinical social worker, and she has a program called Whole Journey, which is for mental counseling and therapy. And her good friend and colleague, now I should mention that Nikessa is in Chesapeake, and then Sarah Mines joins us now from Richmond, Virginia, which is quite a scene, a backdrop, if you will, for what's going on racially in this country in terms of statues being torn down and things of that nature. So Sarah, thanks for joining us. And Sarah, if you could update us and let us know what you do there in Richmond.
Of course, yes. And are we talking professionally or in my personal life as well?
The whole thing.
Sure. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm a colleague of Nikessa Craig's. So I am working on building the second branch of Whole Journey up here in Richmond. We're primarily providing individual therapy right now, and we very much take a holistic approach when we address our clients and their needs.
And certainly there are a lot of needs out there, Nikessa. We just during the show, we talked to Dr. Colleen Hawthorne about trauma and how we're impacted by trauma. Today, I want to talk more about how do we have conversations amongst each other to deal with the trauma so that we find a place to maneuver out of not just coronavirus, but also out of the virus of racism. It's a painful place that we find ourselves in.
Absolutely, and it's a really good point. I think for a lot of people, it's important for them to realize that they have been traumatized, and I think that that's a part of the conversation that's been missed and often under spoken about, right? So the fact that in daily lives for Black Americans and people of color, aggression, and even just the unwillingness to actually see and to acknowledge what has happened on an individual and then a community level has left many of us traumatized, right? So I think it's good for people to at first understand that there is a traumatization effect that is happening individually and then throughout our country, but also how do we have these conversations? And that's a part that is often very uncomfortable for people to even engage with what to say, how to say. And then on the other side, people are oftentimes very concerned and afraid of what the response will be if I am transparent. I think from both perspectives, it's really healthy to look at the context of your experiences, right? So even in our practice, we serve people of color, Black people, but we also serve officers and we serve people who are on the front lines in different ways. And so as people come in and they're trying to discuss their perspective, it's important for us, if we're going to be willing to listen and to actually move forward, to be able to put everyone's experiences into context.
You know, I know both of you are professional counselors, but let's talk about just being women. You're white, you're Black, you have a friendship, you have a bond that will last. You have your friendship, you have your business relationship. What do we need to say to address to white Americans and Black Americans and brown Americans and First Nations, Native Americans, of how we come together, as I often say, at that table of brotherhood and find some good?
A really good question, and I really applaud you because that's a question that's not often asked. So I will say, piggybacking off of Sarah's point, there's a lot of deflection, right? And that's been a tool that's been used systematically to really override the true reasons why protests are actually happening, right? And to keep the power structures strong and in play. And so when I hear someone being very critical, right, and contrasting the idea between a protest and a riot, systematically within history, protests have often had an element of violence that was there. But when you contrast the underlying reason, right, from the destruction of property potentially to the actual destruction of lives, the contrast doesn't stand. We would absolutely prefer that there's no violence and that property and businesses aren't harmed, but at the cost of lives, where that's a bigger issue, a larger issue. That's why the context is so important. But Kelly, to your question that I think is so powerful, women historically, especially Black women, have had to carry issues of our country, of our families on our backs. You know, there's what we call this superwoman syndrome, which is just this inherent, impressed need to fix everyone's problems and to consider ourselves last, to put ourselves very, very last on our own to-do list. And it creates a lot of trauma, a lot of anxiety, and a lot of depression. And so thank you for shouting out the idea that women who are often intersecting, right? Me as a Black woman, intersecting in different areas of society have to carry an additional strain. There's also, you know, information about, even with Breonna Taylor, for example, how a lot of times the Black women in this struggle have taken somewhat of a back seat as far as the news coverage and the media, and that's improving, but it's often been difficult for people to be just as vigilant about the plights of women.
Let me ask you both a very tough question. When you hear the term white privilege, what does that mean to you? And what should, how should we interpret that in America today?
Well, I will jump in here. I think that's a really complex question, to be honest with you. I think white privilege is pervasive. If you look at statistical analysis of essentially any factor of life, white people are given priority, right? You look at the statistical analysis of small business loans, for example. or housing loans. And Black families, Black persons, also brown persons, and any people of color are given far less opportunities, given far less leeway, given subprime loans. It's I know that's only one example, but when we
example.
And when I think of white privilege, it's the matter of showing up in the world and your very presence isn't considered a threat. You know, for someone personally like me that likes to go out in nature and jog, I think of Ahmaud Arbery, right? And the fact that there are so many things I have to consider before I even go out in nature. Do I have identification? Is my poise too close? Could I be considered threatening? Is it too dark outside? Having to show up in life always aware that your very presence might be a threat, that your very existence is seen as a concern, is the total opposite of white privilege. Being able to take a break from the stress of the racial injustice, being able to sign your name and it has just as much validity, that's white privilege. So those are some of the personal instances I could say that if you don't find yourself having to do that every morning when you wake up out of bed and consider, how do I feel safe? How do I not bother other people by my sheer existence? That's white privilege. I think something that's difficult, you know, as Sarah and I work with all different types of people from all different walks of life, is that when people hear white privilege, oftentimes they feel like the aspect of privilege means that there's economic power, right? Personally. And they may say, well, hey, I am just an average Joe. I do not have any extra resources. And so I think for some people, the privilege part is what's concerning, but it's not necessarily about what's in your bank account. It's about the power of your existence and how you can show up and automatically be seen as honest, you know, from a character perspective, to automatically be seen as intelligent. Those are privileges that aren't afforded to us. So I think the usage of the word privilege is something that, you know, is confusing and sometimes allows people to push back who may not understand the depth of it, going back to your sheer existence.
And let me ask you a further question on that. So does it concern you when you see perhaps white conservatives, those who would be in the Republican or far right or conservative groups, and they're pointing fingers at Black Lives Matter, and they're pointing out that, well, they believe that Black Lives Matter is Marxist, and so they denigrate it rather than coming to understand it and having a dialogue with it. Does that cause concern? And does it also cause concern when you have the far left of saying, well, you know, it's almost like burn, baby, burn, meaning Antifa and things of that nature? Where do we find the consensus to have some common ground and some common good for building each other up rather than tearing each other down with our extreme forms of what I believe can be antithetical to finding unity?
Right. Yeah. Great point. Absolutely, it is concerning. And it's personally, I can speak to a lot of examples where I've tried to have dialogue with people who are on the far right, and it's discouraging to note the lack of reception that I've personally experienced, again, as a white person. And that's really unfortunate. And I think creating a common cause, right? If we're actually concerned about the United States, are we concerned about the citizens therein? Who is the focus? What is the focus? What are we trying to get at? Because absolutely the idea that we can burn things down and not necessarily have a plan for the future, that's not helpful for anyone, right? And so what are we actually working toward? Are we working toward unity, or are we working toward destruction? And I think that applies to both sides.
Nikesa?
I think that's a really great um, point that Sarah's making. I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, from a political perspective, it's concerning that race is so polarizing on that spectrum, right? So I wasn't born a Democrat. I wasn't born a libertarian or a Republican. I grew up and then decided to make political affiliations based off of my values and my beliefs. And so I would challenge people to really take a look at your values and your beliefs. And do they fit for all people, or is it a certain type of people? And then if that's the case, what does that really say about your belief system? I think in some ways, as a Black person, there needs to be a systematic change across the board, right? Because inherently our institutions were created to oppress and suppress and to keep power structures in play. So it's something to really consider. How do we do that? How do we take a look at the systems and we strategize them so that there are more opportunities and to Sarah's point, actually more so equity. And so when I think about a plan, or plans or processes that need to happen from a societal standpoint, we're talking about not necessarily just defunding the police. There's value in that. But where does the reallocation of resources go, right? And it needs to be taken a look at with mental health, actual physical health, our education systems. It is hard to find a system in America where there isn't a level of systematic racism that perpetually continues to oppress Black Americans. And so on a certain level, this is really plugging away at our consciousness, right? And how do we sleep at night being able to actually see the repeated instances of people being brutalized and murdered for no apparent reason except for their skin color? So it's very complex. I think there are some great organizations that have laid out great plans, right? Black Lives Matter, the National Urban League. There are organizations that are on the ground also really allowing folks who are protesting to be seen and to be heard, the Bell Project. And so I would really encourage people to find resources where they can really plug in. But at the end of the day, I think it's important for all of us, no matter the color, no matter the political affiliation, to realize that this is still your issue. You may not be Black, but this affects your neighbor. This affects the person who you're sitting beside in church when we get back to in-person church services. This affects who your child may be going to school with. So it's important to really plug in, but it's important to also realize that there will need to be change on multiple levels systemically as well.
That's fantastic. Nikessa Craig and Sarah Mines, I want to thank you both. These are the kind of conversations worth having because these kinds of truths that come out in our dialogue leads to a better understanding of each other. And perceptions can sometimes and oftentimes be the wrong perceptions. But when you have honest dialogue, then you get to the heart of the matter. And thereby you have some transformation because you realize that you can dispense with the culture and with the race and with the religion and get people one-on-one, as I like to say to my children, eye to eye, nose to nose, and realize that you really do have a lot of likeness and sameness. And you talked about the oneness. Basically, you're talking about the oneness of humanity, the family of God. So I thank you both for being on the program. And we will continue these dialogues. And so please come back so we can keep opening up the aperture of our window into the world of Black, white, brown, yellow, all God's children, one shade of beautiful. Thank you both.
The opportunity.
Welcome back to the program. So with the myriad of things that we're going through right now in this new normal that I've often stated is quite abnormal, I mean, who deals with a pandemic every day? We in America and the world have been dealing with it. And it gives us pause to say, how do we exhale? How do we get calm? Well, did you know there's an app for that? It's called Calm. And now King James of the NBA, LeBron James, the LA Lakers superstar, has teamed up with the meditation and sleep app Calm to actually show people that mental fitness is just as important as physical and spiritual fitness. In fact, James will be doing a lot of original voice content to fill that platform, and he will be starring in a new marketing campaign that will see him on TV, billboard, and radio ads, and it's all about training our mind. He's going to introduce a series of 10-minute segments focusing on mental fitness, and he'll be covering topics ranging from managing our emotions to sleep and maintaining balance. And he's going to release 5 episodes coming up in the near future. Now, to talk about this is attorney and economist Mark Harris.
I tell you, I love LeBron. LeBron has embodied what it means to build black. I've heard all kinds of people, the old FUBU, for us, by us. You remember that from back in the day, yeah. Kelly? It was a company that was formed that was very successful in clothing, a clothing line. LeBron has taken that to a whole different level. For everything he does on the basketball court, for everything he is as a father and a husband, for everything he is as a spokesperson and an advertising person, I'm actually using his advertised product, Calm, C-A-L-M, which is a meditation device to help me stay calm every day, once a day. And LeBron is just advertising with this. I don't know that he has a bigger hand in it than that. But I had been talking about meditation, and seeing LeBron endorse this product brought me into the fold of this app. So here he is, a guy who came out of Ohio and never lost sight of who he is, brought his boys with him, brought 4 of his childhood friends with him, one who's become the most successful sports agent in basketball, young Mr. Paul. And then the other one, Maverick Carter, who he's formed a new $100 million enterprise to be able to bring to Hollywood some of the same kind of liberation LeBron has brought to the NBA. I think it's going to be an amazing, amazing endeavor.
That's fantastic. Thank you for bringing us up to date on that. And how might all of us within our Black and brown communities aspire or achieve those same kinds of business programs? Because let's face it, coronavirus has disrupted the economy. So now we have to be more entrepreneurial now than ever before.
You know, it's a thin line that has to be walked, Kelly. One of the things that I was raised to believe, and I know it was saying with you, is that you don't brag and that you don't gloat and that you don't toot your own horn. I'll never forget, way, way back, my father saw me kind of crowing in front of the mirror when I was about to go out. Kelly, I was doing my thing and making myself look good. And he said, son, if you got to do all that and tell everybody how good you look, you probably need to check yourself a little bit more carefully. Because if you got to tell them something's not right. And I said, wow, I never forgot that. And I carried it over into my life, Kelly. And so in my personal life, and I'm saying this carefully, while the coronavirus has been an absolute travesty, both from a health standpoint, a mental health standpoint, a physical health, a spiritual health standpoint, I haven't been in a church service, a non-virtual church service in the past several months. It really tears at me. There have been some opportunities from an economic standpoint. I want to talk specifically about those if I can, Kelly.
Sure.
So you got to look at the overall economy. One of the good news takeaways from what's happening right now is a projected inflation rate for this year of 0.62%. Let me put that in context. That's less than 1% of inflation. And in normal years, you range in the United States between 2 and 3% in moderate inflation years and as much as 4 or 5% in horrifically high inflation years. So what that means is if you put $1 on a shelf, it erodes at that level. That means that same dollar that is sitting there from a buying potential is now worth 99 cents or 98 cents or 95 cents. And you didn't do anything. You just put the dollar there. That's why many of us are not advocates for saving alone. Because if your saving rate does not exceed the inflation rate, you're losing money. So you could be doing everything right, Kelly. Your viewers could be doing everything right, setting up a nice saving account or a piggy bank for their kids, and it's steadily losing money for them year after year after year. So the way you fight that is to make sure that whatever you're earning on that dollar exceeds whatever you're losing through inflation. And that's a pretty low bar right now. At less than 1%, that means if you're investing anything that's getting you a return higher than 1%, you're making money. Pretty simple math. So you have to be invested. In the savings account, Professor Harris, why can't I do that and beat that? Because savings accounts will only pay you 0.05%. So you're 57, what we call basis points short of the inflation rate by just putting it in a savings account. None of the banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase, Citibank, will generally pay you higher than 5 basis points, 0.00005 on your money in a savings account. You just can't catch up. You have to be invested. It is absolutely essential that our community understand, do our studying and diligence, and be disciplined about investing as opposed to just saving.
And where should they start?
Ooh, that's a good question. You get in where you fit in. You invest in what you know. If you're a person who really is into the fashion game, I believe you start investing in fashion stocks. I've mentioned my sons many times, and I mention it as a proud father, but I really mention my son as an example of young people. I have a 29-year-old son and a 32-year-old son. Both of them are invested in the markets. One who takes a more conservative long-term approach, and the other who's a swashbuckler. He got the patch on, he got the saber in his mouth, he got the rag on his head, and he's looking to come in and trade. And they've both been very successful. Their personalities dictate how they invest. That's what I would tell your viewers. I am a relative. I'm not conservative and I'm not swashbuckle, devil may care. I'm somewhere in the middle. I want to be, because I'm closer to the end of the game of my life, I want to be careful, but I also want to take advantage of what the market will provide. So I invest in things that I understand. I understand retail, I understand transportation, I understand finance. Those are the kind of companies. I understand tech to a certain extent. Those are the kind of companies that I invest in. And I'm really excited about the opportunities in the tech industry. They've been amazing throughout this process.
Welcome back to the program. My next guest is the author of the ebook called Rhapsody Restored, God's Strategy for Rap. She is also putting her finishing touches on her upcoming book called The Power Behind Success, Secrets of Music Moguls. Her name is Cheryl Green, and Cheryl believes that music moves people, sometimes because of its beat, and sometimes because of its message. Rap and hip hop, she says, are the most popular styles of music in the world today because the genre brings both bomb beats and lyricism, and she believes that the rappers, are actually stepping into God's plan to help change the world beyond coronavirus, beyond racism. She joins us right now. Welcome back to the program. So I am delighted and excited to interview this next young lady and to present her to each and every one of you. She has a book, an upcoming book called The Power Behind the Success, Secrets of Music Moguls. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Cheryl Green, not just an author, but also an ad sales executive and an ad account executive for radio. And she's done a lot of work, and she's living out in Los Angeles now, originally from Detroit. Cheryl, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kelly.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Tell me about where you're at now in terms of this new book and the secrets that you're revealing about these music moguls, most of them coming from hip hop.
Sure. Well, it's amazing the time that we're in. It's just a very timely place where the Lord is just unfolding how he works things together for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And so when you look at the wealth that has been stored up in our music moguls, it's because when he says now, we got the pause button on now all over the world, but when he releases that pause button and he's ready to flood the world with a righteous rap flow and the movement that he's getting ready to dictate, we're not going to have to go the people that he's going to use, we won't have to worry about getting denied at the bank, so to speak. You know, as a small business owner myself, you know, when you're going for business credit, when you're going for loans, when you need things, they want a stack of stuff that if you don't have those deliverables, you won't be funded. And so your dream is on halt and you cannot produce that vision. And so what the next step for what's about to happen, it's very prophetic. It's a prophetic call. And I just put out a ebook, a small ebook. It's a prelude. It really goes into what you can look out for. But that's what it's all about. It's really about, he's got a movement that is about to come. But when he tells his men and women, his moguls, go, none of them have to like say, oh, I'll be right back. I'm going to check and see if I got the approval yet. Because that's why they're billionaires and multimillionaires, and who'd have thunk it? You know how we used to say the thing about 30 years ago, who would have thought rap would have been around? Well, it's been what, 40, you know, it's been longer than that now, and it's still around, and it's still the word. And so he's going to infuse that word in rap and that Jesus. And that's why you got Kanye talking about Jesus as king and all that. The Lord, that's anointing. That's anointing. And so the Lord has a very exciting time for the whole wide world. So I really, and it's such a time as this, I want to encourage the world. Be encouraged. It's about to get exciting. This is the time to reset, relax, rejuvenate, because you're going to be busy dancing at a dance party about what's about to take off for this world. Be encouraged.
This book that you put together, you talk about Kanye and other artists and how they're rising, and new artists will be coming up. I mean, I'm thinking about Lecrae, who's out there, and the game, the hip hop rap game is changing, and I think it's going back to the way it first began, and that is we started talking about what ailed us, like don't push me because I'm close to the edge, I'm trying not to lose my head, or Kumo D saying I got to get a job. So it seems like our rap game is changing as we're speaking to what's happening in coronavirus, what's happening with the racial virus, the political virus, and people are now standing up saying we've got to do the right thing all the time. It's the right time.
That, and what's happened is our moguls have grown up. I mean, when you're young, you say all kind of curse words and bad stuff and everything, but these men have grown up. They've become fathers. They've become husbands. They have little girls now. So their words are different now. They're seasoned salt. So it's a sign of wisdom. And the Lord is they know that if it had not been for the Lord on their side, it's no way they created the empires that they have.
And when can we expect it to be released?
Well, again, I do have the one I just released that is available now, and then the upcoming book will be available after the first of the year.
Well, I appreciate you so much for stepping into this new phase of hip hop. We know that it is constantly changing and constantly being impactful around the world, and certainly in a time like now where there are global protests, and we've seen how even the likes of Chuck D has changed the lyrics to fight the power, to focus on the recent cases of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. And there's just a plethora of good talent in hip hop that's now raising the standard, raising the bar, if you will, to call us all to order. And I like the approach you're taking, that they're all calling us to, many of them are calling us to take time out, pray, think about God blessing you so that we can move forward.
Absolutely. Words are so powerful. And so it's amazing. That's why they've been given the gift that they have and the voice that they have and the platform that they have. It's in addition to calling out these social action and from all this racial injustice, that they're going to really have a plan for all of it and what's coming up. And the beautiful part too is they will have that piece in there about salvation, because that's what brings it all together. That's what ties it in a bow, because a lot of them have relationships with the Lord, and once they start speaking that on their platform, that will release other people to receive the Lord. And that is where the real healing is going to come into place. And when the last days and their last breath comes, the Lord's not going to say how many downloads did you get last month and how many streams do you have. He's going to say, what did you do with the platform that I gave you? And so these brothers are aware of that too. And they're in the studio right now. And I want to be in the studio with them and put some good stuff out here so we can heal this world, fix this situation. But it's on the way. It's on the way. I'm encouraged.
You talk about the brothers. Let's not forget the sisters are out there too.
Brothers and the sisters. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Cheryl Green, thank you. And the book is called?
The book is called Rhapsody Restored, God's Strategy for Rap. That is available on Amazon today.
Looking forward to reading it. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. God bless you.
God bless you.
Welcome back. I want to thank all of the guests who appeared on tonight's program, and I especially want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out to spend this past hour with me as we discuss all the issues that seem to be impacting us as we deal with this coronavirus, with the racial virus and the political divisions that we go through. We have a lot to do, and we must do it together. Having said that, my final word is this: may we all be righted and ignited and united to keep spreading love, freedom, and peace. From Washington, the nation's capital, good night.
You see, love isn't bought, but comes with a price of forgiveness, and we all bleed the same. Yeah. If you don't feel it now, just wait. It's coming, y'all, the love train. Just give it time, give it time. Get on board. That means you and you and you on the love train. Get on board. All creeds and colors, brothers, all sisters and sisters on the love train. Get on board the love train. Everyone's invited. We're all united on the love train. Get on board. All creeds and colors, my sisters and brothers, get on board on the love train. Woo-hoo! Yeah. Yeah. It's all right. Just give it time. Keep on marching on. Keep on being strong. Get on board the love train, love train. Let's spread some